So I'll probably wait, a minute or two just to let some more people join in. But I did want to open up the floor if anyone wants to introduce themselves and say hi. We'd love to get the conversation started.
So I'll start. So I'm Philip Grossman. I'm a cinematographer and technologist. I spent the last almost 3/4 of a decade with a company called Imagine Communications, where we made automation and networking gear for television film industry. Prior to that, I spent half a decade with the Weather Channel, as the senior director for media technology and strategy, and I'm working as a consultant with Digital Glue as well. And I'm also a cinematographer on the side, and produced and hosted a show on the Discovery Channel a couple years ago about Chernobyl. So I'm a geek propeller head. I love technology, so I'm here to help hopefully answer some questions on storage or anything else.
Awesome. And then Nick, yeah, you can go ahead and introduce yourself if you'd like, as people are joining.
Yeah, Nick Anderson, product manager for Creative Space. I also am a colorist, post supervisor, editor, kind of all things post. Yeah, just been working on, one of the things for me really was, and kind of why we started Creative Space was just my experience working here in Atlanta with various clients doing color work. And when you're a colorist, you kind of get the material at the end, so everyone else is kind of any little tiny workarounds or little kind of kicking the can down the road all ends up coming at your doorstep because you have to conform it and get into the application. And so really the initial impetus for Creative Space and the storage kind of being the center of the workflow and the stuff we're working on now is really about how do we make the tools easier for people to use and understand and and work with customers to inform them on various workflow things so that they don't run into the same mistakes, because it's kind of people don't realize how hard it is to just get something out. And it's kind of like lots of ships are leaving the harbor, but you don't really notice how many of them are sinking before they reach the destination. So that's why we made the guide and doing things like this to just try to help people as much as possible.
Yeah, and if you haven't yet downloaded the Creative Space guide, if you just go to our website, creative.space, there will be a pop-up that you can enter your name, company, and email address, and you'll be able to download our collaboration guide. It's 57 pages, so it is a big guide, but it has step-by-step information on tips and tricks and everything for DaVinci Resolve 17. So hopefully that will be helpful for everyone.
Hey guys, I quickly want to introduce myself. My name is Kurt Shiny. I'm a sales director here at Digital Glue Creative Space. So I want to thank you all for coming. If what you see today is something that you're really interested in, just let us know and we can get you any information that you might need. But I know that this is more of a brainstorming session and a great happy hour. So I'm going to enjoy the conversation as well.
Awesome. All right, well, it's 5:06, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So my name is Christina Anderson. I am the marketing director over here at Digital Glue and Creative Space. I want to give you a little bit of a background on us. As a systems integrator, Digital Glue, we have worked with customers for over 2 decades, just helping them get all the technology they need to build out anything from studios. We do broadcast distribution, contribution, all that stuff. And we really saw that there was a hole in the industry for a need for this collaborative storage. We saw that people were spending so much money on this huge piece of hardware that is kind of obsolete, and they just end up having to throw it away and get a new one. So we watched our customers kind of buy into and then sober up to this myth of the cloud. Typical cloud workflows, they force teams to manage production assets in 2 places. And I'm sure everyone working from home has experienced this, where you have to manage it on local and the cloud storage. But with our Creative Space solution, the two places become one through our enterprise storage offering that it actually lives at your facility, but it can be accessed remotely at any time. And unlike anyone else, we bundle the hardware. We've spent years building this software solution as well, and it's all offered at one price. So one monthly or annual rate, and it can scale as you grow your business. So if you start out only needing a certain capacity, and then a year later your business grows, which we love, you can easily upgrade to the next level of storage, and you get that security of having it be on premise. So we call it the fog. It's like bringing the cloud down to earth. And like I said, you can go to our website, creative.space. There's no .com, just creative.space, and you can learn more. And obviously reach out to any of us after this if you have any questions. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on the questions. Like I said, if anyone has anything they would like to add, as we're talking, this is a discussion, so feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself. But if no one has a question right now, we'll get started. So for this one, someone was wondering if you could touch on on-set workflows as well as RAID solutions for the color suite, and just fast workflow solutions in general, ways to make your workflow more efficient.
Yeah, let's see if I can share my screen. I've got can you, Christina, can you activate screen sharing for me? It says the host disabled it. Say, can I do it now? There we go. Oh, crap, it's doing the dreaded system preferences thing. Let's see here. Security and privacy. Recording. There we go. Let's see if it just works now. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so a few years ago, I kind of did everything from live color, DIT, editing, on set for a TV pilot called Walter Frisk. And this was right when the DaVinci Resolve live grading controls came out. So as far as an on-set workflow, what we put together basically was a wireless transmitter sent the signal from the camera to one of the Blackmagic mini recorders, which was connected to my laptop. And I had a color panel connected to that. And then the mini monitor passed it out to the monitor for Video Village. And I was basically able to take that feed coming in and color that live. And the way that the DaVinci Resolve live grading controls work is basically it's getting in a live feed, it gets the time code, and you can do basically anything in Resolve other than like keyframing, because basically you're just getting a live stream. And so you just take a snapshot of whatever the look is at that point, and it kind of adds that as like a still clip onto the timeline for the live grade. And so then in addition to this laptop, I also had my Mac Pro, where we would offload the camera cards and basically to the storage and actually access the real media. And I had basically a drop folder that went between the laptop and the Mac Pro. So once the storage or the footage came off, I could basically apply using the color trace and the time code, the same looks over to the other clips, and then basically just switch, basically just color them, kind of copy the look to the other instances. And one of the things I found that was really great was that kind of the natural flow of production, where you kind of have like setting up, and then you're doing the rolling, that pretty much I could do a setup for the color for the whole setup once, and pretty much it was consistent across the whole thing because the lighting was done pretty well. And then I could focus on editing and offloading for the rest of the time. So it didn't really take up that much more time for me to do the live grading. And I was actually within Resolve able to do the live editing kind of on set, bringing in the footage and using like the take selector, basically just cutting in all the stuff as it came in. So then in addition to doing the live color, I had that kind of dailies color already done on all the clips. And I was able to have pretty much kind of within the wrap of a scene, like an hour after the wrap of a scene, I had that scene cut in the timeline ready to go. And because I used the take selector, instead of them saying, oh, well, what about that take? And having to go into the bin and find it, I basically just opened up the take selector and switched to the other one. So it was a really powerful workflow for kind of managing everything on set, and the natural kind of pacing of things made it actually pretty easy. And we also then rendered out HI264 proxies from that media with the color, and then people could watch that on iPads as well. So other than that,
were you taking the node itself, what you did in the node, and copying the node, or you just took the snapshot and it knew what was in the snapshot and how to apply that same, it had that information in the snapshot as that was in the node?
Yeah, so basically when you take the snapshot, it's kind of creating a clip from like a still of the feed that then it links the whole node structure to.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, so all I had to do is basically at that time I had to export a Resolve project, and then I opened that up on the other computer and brought the power grades over. Today I would just export out a DRT file and import that over. It'd be easier.
Okay.
So yeah, but the other question about the storage, I actually use this Rogue here actually for my own color work, and it works fantastic. One of the things that's unique about ZFS, which is the file system that we use, is that it has a really powerful caching feature. And so even though this has 4 spinning disk drives, the way that the caching works, that basically I'm working off of the RAM, so I get SSD speeds. And we even have an internal SSD in here for, really the only thing you need to use that for is image sequences. You can do image sequences basically normally if you just kind of play back once, it'll load up the RAM, but once you kind of fill out that buffer, you get like freezing point and you got to go back and basically loads in again. So you get kind of whatever your RAM range is on real-time playback for image sequences. But using the SSD cache, you just copy those over for what you're working on now, and you've got real-time performance. But other than image sequences, everything else works great in it. And really, even just with the image sequences, I'm talking about 4K, OpenEXR, those kinds of things. It actually works really well with the optimized media and render cache format that Resolve has without necessarily using the SSD. And that's basically an image sequence format. And it works quite well with that. So that's what I've been using for years, and it works really well. And we've got, basically 48 terabytes and 64 terabyte versions. And this has the full features of all of our other systems as well. So the full enterprise software, you can do all the FTP sharing with people, so it's easier just to send data back and forth. And with the VPN integration we have, that FTP goes over UDP, which is the same thing as Aspera and Signiant. So you end up getting those similar performances. You get the accelerated transfer speeds. So I mean, I'm regularly getting off of this, 900 megabytes per second or megabits per second. Forget which one the Blackmagic tool shows down here. But yeah, and now we've actually got this, so it has PCIe 4.0. So it's using the new AMD CPU and motherboard, so it gets even more performance. So yeah, and it's got all the different features that we've got in our systems.
Awesome, thank you. So for the next question, this one is for Philip. The question is how, you obviously talked about how you've gone to Chernobyl and gone overseas for a lot of different footage or cinematography and photography trips. So how do you manage your storage on the road and in inhospitable locations?
Let's see, I've been doing this for a decade now. And I at one time, the first time I ever shot RAW, and it was Cinema DNG, and I took 24 terabytes of 3.5-inch drives with me, because anytime you go anywhere and you shoot, you want to have 2 copies of everything. And the idea was, in case we ever got stopped at the borders, one set would go with my friend, and the other set would go with me and fly home, and then we could, if need be, we'd at least have one set that got out of the country. And I swore I would never shoot RAW again after that. Of course, recently with SSDs and NVMEs and everything getting smaller, it's gotten a lot easier. And now I travel with a couple small, I mean, the size of a pack of gum NVMe drives. I have to shoot red. It's either going to be 8K or 6K, but it's compressed, so it doesn't take up huge amounts of space. But I can now, in what used to take up a footprint of a single hard drive, I can fit 4, 5, 6 little NVMe drives. And then, there's different software. I happen to use the Hedges product for doing the offload. So there's 2 copies of everything made wherever I go, and it's SSDs, so they're fairly resilient. And I still go through the process of one set of drives goes with my filming partner, and the other set of drives goes with me. We go back to our home countries that way, in case something were to happen at a border, because these locations are Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Belarus, Ukraine. Not always the friendly, especially if you're an American sometimes. But it's a matter of keeping the footprint of the storage small, as dense as possible, and NVMEs have really made that a godsend. And then as soon as I get home, everything immediately gets offloaded off the cards onto my storage at home. And that way, I at that point, I've got it in 3 locations, and it's typically stays that way until the project is done, and or I make several copies of that material locally at home, and there's always a hard drive that goes up to my sister's house out of my house, so there's always a copy there, and then I will erase the portable drives. But that's sort of, and that, like I said, I've done it from even 2.5-inch SSDs. There were stacks of them when I would go, because they were only 512 megs or terabyte in size, and now we've got NVMEs that are 8 terabytes in size, and so 4 of those is more than enough to have storage and backup when I go.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So
and X-ray machines don't affect SSDs. They don't affect spinning drives too much either. They can, but with SSDs, and especially the NVMEs, haven't had any issues.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine having all of that valuable footage. You have to have as many backups as possible. You don't lose any of that.
It's in my whole career to date, I've only lost footage once. It was a personal project I was working on, where I was during NAB, and I had gone up to Death Valley, to an area called Rainbow Canyon, where the Air Force and the Navy do low altitude training, and they fly through valleys, and you stand up on the hillside above the valley, so the jets are actually below you, and you never know if they're going to be there. They don't publicize the flight. So I just took a risk, and I went up the day before. I got up at 6 a.m, and I went up there and I shot all day long. I got all this 8K footage. It was fantastic. I edited all together, had some stuff for our booth at NAB with the company I was with, and I just wasn't thinking through where these things lived. And I got home, and I thought they had been copied someplace, and they weren't. And so I no longer have the original footage. I just have the final version of it. And they no longer fly in the valley, so I can't even go back and redo it. So
wow. Okay, so moving along here. So the next question is actually, it can be for Philip or Nick, but how does drive performance affect your ability to edit different types of material like HD, UHD, and 4K?
Well, I know.
Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, you've got kind of various factors here. So, the first one is your individual drive performance, which I know, Philip, you had a slide earlier I saw that was kind of saying the exact number is 280 something megs per second, I believe, for, your standard hard drive. And so traditionally storage scales out by just adding more drives. So you divide the work across those and you get the aggregate performance of those drives. Whereas let's say like in our storage, you're actually caching to RAM, so you get the performance of the RAM. So as long as you can get the data off of the drive into that fast enough, you're fine on performance. And the same thing is true for, typically with, those multiple drives, you can kind of only have one operation per drive because those are spinning disks. So basically, if you have 2 bits of data that you're trying to get off of that, it's going to have to go back and forth really fast to both of those. And that's where you end up getting problems if you, for example, plug in your hard drive to your computer and try to rig it up as a share over your network, and 2 people try to grab from it. It's going to start cranking and making weird noises because it's trying too hard. And so, older storage systems would figure out how to kind of route people to different drives and make copies of the data on different drives in order to get around this. But that's not true when you have the RAM cache. It basically acts like an SSD. So, spinning disk is kind of linear access, single access, whereas SSD gives you parallel access. And the RAM is basically like SSD. So you get random access to everything. So at that point, basically the bottleneck becomes your connection to the storage. So whether it's 1 gig or 10 gig, 25 gig or 100 gig, that really kind of becomes the bottleneck. And for the most part, on a 1 gig connection, you can do like lots of, you can do a full HD workflow. You can even do some basic 4K workflows. And then 10 gig gives you kind of the more advanced 4K workflows and even 8K and, up in certain scenarios. And then obviously 25 gig and those give you even, more bandwidth to work with. And of course, resolution isn't just the only thing. It's also, how compressed or uncompressed is the file itself and how efficient is it, in size. Because you could have an 8K file that is H.264 and it's super tiny, but it's 8K. And then you could have an SD file that's huge because it's uncompressed. So resolution isn't necessarily always the factor.
And for me, it's always been chasing CPU and drive speed, CPU and drive speed. It's at one point I've got CPU that's fast enough to, do SD on the computer. And then all of a sudden HD comes out and my CPUs aren't fast enough to do HD, but my drives are fast enough. And then you get to the next one, the drives aren't fast enough. And so it's a never ending battle, it seems. And now that NAS has really, the 10 gig has become a fairly ubiquitous standard, on most machines. And I say that, 10 gig has become mainstream when you can buy a 10 gig network switch from Walmart.com. So it's become pretty standard. I remember 10 years ago at the Weather Channel, we had like 4 10 gig ports and they were sacrosanct, and you couldn't plug anything into those except for the gear that really needed the 10 gig ports. Now in my home, I've got an 8 gig or an 8 port 10 gig switch, for my storage and computer. And so, and as we talk about, that connection speed at a 1 gig connection, which was pretty standard for computers for the longest period of time, it's still fairly standard in most people's homes, consumers. You could do roughly 5 to 6 streams of HD ProRes 422. You can do 1 stream of UHD, so you really can't edit ProRes on a 1 gig connection. And you can't do any RAW. It's a variable compression. So let's say at 160 megabytes per second, which is sort of that lower compressed version or higher compressed version, you're still talking about 1200 to 1300 megabits per second, which, you got 1,000 megabits or 1 gig. So you can't even do read across that. Now, all of a sudden you put a 10 gig connection on there and you can do up to 60, I think it's 55 ProRes HD clips, no problem at all across that connection. You can do, 3 to 6 red clips across that connection. Of course, then it flips back to, well, my CPU can really only handle probably 2 to 3 at a time because of the compress. So it's that balancing act. And as Nick said, within that ZFS, because of the caching, it's really sort of interesting that it used to be most NAS or most RAIDs are based on the number of drives you have in place. You have 4 drives. It's sort of an aggregate of those 4 drives. You add a 5th drive, you get, the 5th drive in there. But I've been doing some testing with the Rogue Pro, and I have a 8 bay Thunderbolt 3 RAID set up in RAID 6. And I'm only getting about 100 megabytes more speed than I'm getting with the Rogue Pro that only has 6 drives in it across a 10 gig link. And the difference is pretty much the link, because I've saturated the link. And I've done some other testing. I know you can actually get more than that. So you're getting the equivalent of 8 drives on a Thunderbolt 3 out of 6 drives because of that caching technology. It's pulling the stuff off the drives, putting it in memory. You're actually accessing it through memory so the drives can spin up and fill and sort of keep the system going and feeding your editing workflow. So it's actually pretty amazing. Of course, now we're doing 8K, and heaven forbid, we're going to do 12 and 16K soon. We're going to need bigger processors.
Right. So I guess that kind of goes into this next question. Obviously, working for you, Philip, being so mobile over the years, and the performance of, choosing which storage to use based off of performance. How does storage kind of work into your workflow since you are so mobile? Whether it's cloud or on-premise, is it an integrated approach, or how do you utilize both storage options,
Yeah.
especially
So
working remote?
yeah. So I hate the term hybrid. Hybrid, we're really talking about more of an integrated approach. Where I can use cloud, I'll use cloud. Where it makes sense to use, local storage, I use local storage, and use it what it's good for. This idea that everything's going to the cloud, I got to put everything in the cloud. I always use the example. Maybe I'm an oddball. I've got 280 terabytes of storage at my house right now. If I were to have that equivalent storage at, say, AWS, it would cost me thousands of dollars a month to have that amount of storage, tens of thousands, I think, the last time I calculated. I didn't spend maybe $5,000 or $6,000 over a 2 or 3 year period to accumulate all that. So it doesn't make sense for me to put it in the cloud, but I do when I'm, before where I said where I have to take drives and give them to my friends and they'd have their drives, so we go across the border. Well, now I can use, when I get back to a major city that usually has decent internet connection, I can load things into Dropbox and let it sync overnight. Typically won't be all my footage depending on what I've shot, but I can at least say, okay, these are really good shots. I know I want these out of here just in case something happens. So it's about that workflow. And as soon as I get back to the States, it comes off the cloud and I clear that off so that I'm not, if it's AWS being charged monthly for everything that I have, but it's that workflow. It's just like content lifecycle. Storage is the underlying component of content. Without storage, you don't have content in the digital world. And so the content lifecycle and storage lifecycle sort of have to mirror or match one another as to when I put stuff on local drives, when it needs to go to a cloud. Maybe it's at the end it goes to cloud. Maybe it's during the process. If I'm doing collaborative work and I need to have proxies in the cloud, then I'll use the cloud for that. So it's really about understanding what your workflow is and picking the right tool. It's just like, no offense to Adobe and Premiere. I like Premiere. I used to use Premiere a lot, but I'm not going to do coloring on Premiere. I'm going to do coloring in DaVinci. So it's the same with, why would I put something on AWS if I need to do it? I always use the model of, I'm fortunate enough to have a 1 gig fiber connection at my house to the internet. But again, I can only do one stream of R3D on that if I tried to edit from the cloud. So I'm not going to use the cloud for editing. It doesn't make sense. So I'm going to have a solution, or if a business that, again, if I have 12 editors at a facility, I'm not going to try and go against a 1 gig connection to the internet. Or even if you're lucky enough to have a 10 gig connection, all the machines within that building can have a 10 gig connection to the local storage. So it's picking the storage or the medium that supports what your needs are. If you're only editing proxies, you're only editing H.264, cloud editing is perfect for that. If you're trying to do color and you're doing, 422 HQ, or you're doing, 8K, you're not going to do it in the cloud. So it's picking the right storage mode for the work that you're trying to do.
Right. And do you feel like are there different workflows that are best for different industries, or is there really kind of a baseline one that is just a best practice for anyone in the post-production, no matter what industry?
I think that it's all there are some baseline elements. We ingest, I always say the content lifecycle is basically 3 circles in a Venn diagram: create, manage, distribute. That's the entire content lifecycle. In some cases, create, manage, and distribute are all one flow because it's live, like news. Create, manage, and distribute's one. So there's some underlying big blocks that are the same, but how you do
Mhm,
something, say for episodic television versus a
mhm,
documentary versus a narrative film versus a music video are very, very different. And so again, it's looking at those tools and finding what works best for you. It-
mhm,
we should always be picking the tools to support our workflow, not fitting our workflow into tools because somebody said this is the greatest tool since sliced bread. But really thinking about what's going to support you and look for it. Yes, in some cases you may have to modify a workflow because a specific tool doesn't exist to do what you need it to do. But you find the closest that you can for it, and eventually you'll find something that's a little bit closer and a little bit closer. You may never find the perfect thing, but that's the idea, is that find what's best for your workflow that supports what you're trying to do.
mhm. That's great. So the next question that we got from someone is, how do you, and this is, I mean, for Philip and Nick, obviously, Philip, your experience is mainly, overseas with this. Nick is just, going from working in a studio to working remote. But how do you share or transfer large footage files with the restraints of your Wi-Fi at home or when you're overseas?
And take that first, Nick.
Yeah. Yeah. So, our with Creative Space, we've kind of developed what we call this fog workflow. And really, the issue we saw was with cloud workflows is that everything is basically upload to the cloud and then download, down to your workstation. With fog, we really kind of take a two-pronged approach where basically the person who originally creates or kind of processes the media, they create the proxies, or even if you use like a ATEM Mini Pro ISO on set, or a Teradek or something, you can generate proxies. But really, you edit the proxies live over the internet, and we support that with our desktop app, mounting, and the VPN. And then overnight, when you're not using that bandwidth, then you transfer the large files. And we've found basically that even on like a 25 megabit per second connection, we're able to transfer basically like 1.1 terabytes overnight. And so we've had really good success with that with our customers, even like in LA, where they have residential internet. They can sync things overnight. But it's really that process of kind of start now with the lower bandwidth thing that you can do in real time that's been optimized for the internet, and then sync when you're not working.
And in my case, so over the years it's changed, but in some of my locations, like Baikonur, we're lucky to have electricity in the hotel, let alone internet that was more than a couple megabits. But as soon as I got to Astana, which is the capital in Kazakhstan, we actually had pretty good internet connection, 60, 70, 100 megabits. So in the past, it would have been, okay, when I get to the hotel, I use Dropbox or AWS or something, and I sync it all up to the cloud. And then when I get home, I download it all. But I started because again, I have a lot of storage here, and prior to working with Creative Space, I have my Synologies, which allowed me to just basically use those as local clouds. So instead of going up to AWS and then back down to my local storage, which is 2 hops, I could actually go directly to my local storage, which is that concept of fog. It's on premise, which is where Creative Space, and it's not only does it have that same capability, it has the same capacity, it has the capability of doing a high speed edit on it. So now I've got sort of the best of both worlds. So I can use syncing technologies to use the internet. I always say people don't necessarily want to edit they don't want to edit in the internet or on the internet. They want to edit via the internet, which means, or in the cloud, via the cloud, which means I'm moving it from my machine to my local machine via the cloud. I don't necessarily need to store in the cloud. I think that's, people are finding that to be more, at least in my workflows, to be more advantageous, in that I'm not having to do 2 sets of hops to the cloud then back down again. I can actually traverse the cloud directly to my local storage, the fog.
Mhm. Cool. So this last one that we have is for Nick. So, and it circles around the DaVinci Resolve working remote as DaVinci Resolve guide. So how can I use DaVinci Resolve to collaborate better while I'm working at home?
Yeah, so the first thing is if you're not using DaVinci Resolve to edit, it's still worth using DaVinci Resolve to prep the proxy footage for the editors, especially if you're going to be coloring it afterwards. Just there's, one of the features that's really core in DaVinci Resolve that a lot of people don't know about is the real name feature, which basically is a metadata field. There's different options for it. You can name that field after what's already in the clip, the name of the bin or the folder structure. I mean, there's lots of different ways you can name it. But basically, when you render out the file, it's going to embed that metadata in the file. So a lot of times when you're working, you have a problem with, let's say like red footage. It splits up the clips into, multiple clips, and then it has like _1, _2. Different software applications will ignore the underscore number, or it will have it, or, so basically when you're kind of sending things back and forth, they don't do the same thing. So you end up having to manually relink every single clip. Well, if you use these real names, you get this metadata embedded in, you can use that instead of the file name to do all the relinking. So that saves a lot of headache you might run into without realizing. And then also now with the DaVinci Resolve bin and timeline files, it's a lot easier to distribute things between users and kind of collaborate. Before you had to send project files and then open them up and turn on project switching and copy stuff over. Now, basically you can just take a bin and send it to someone. And so, now it's actually pretty easy to use Resolve to collaborate. Everyone basically just, someone initially preps the media. They don't even have to render out any proxies. If everyone's editing and working in Resolve, you just create that bin of media and then you distribute that out. And then kind of everyone basically just has, like think of it like you have two root directories in your Resolve project. You've got media and you've got timelines. Media basically is just all of the bins that get distributed out to everyone. And then timelines, you basically have a bin within there for each user. And so then as people are working, they send you their timeline, you load that in, put it in their folder, and then you say, okay, I'm going to duplicate that, bring that into mine, and I'll work off of that. And it's a pretty good workflow for collaborating. The only missing link with this is how do you get the media files to where they need to go? And that's basically what we've kind of solved with our built-in FTP and VPN connection. But you could use any, you could use Dropbox, you could use any other solution for getting the files to where they need to go. And ideally what you'd want to do is kind of match the folder structure to what the other person had. There's a feature within Resolve called like mapped mounts. So you can kind of go into your preferences. This is all in the guide. But you can go in and you can basically say, here's what the other person's drive path looks like, and here's what mine is, and then it will translate that on the fly for you. So you can send things back and forth and you don't have to relink anything. So yeah, so obviously we have the whole guide that goes into kind of how to do all this stuff, but it's actually a pretty good workflow now and pretty similar to what you would find in Premiere with productions and Avid with bin sharing now.
And is that new? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so what's the easy? So I've never really done proxy workflow because I've been fortunate enough to have the right drives local to me. But if I'm going to look to do more collaboration, what's the easiest way to do sort of a proxy workflow within DaVinci? So DaVinci knows that it's a proxy and I can switch between proxies and non-proxies without having to relink.
Yeah, so the newest one of the newest features that came out in the last version with 17 was the proxy feature. So what they used to have was basically kind of a caching format where each frame was a file. And it was, you couldn't really just go into the file system and find these and move them around. Now you can just make proxies from anything and basically put them in there and sync them up based on metadata. So you could use the real name for that. You could export, you could basically do a dailies batch, render out the footage, import those proxies. You can also just select all the clips, right click and say create proxies, and they have a range of different formats they support, like ProRes, DNX, and any format that's not supported in there you can create externally and you can add and it'll link up. I've tested it. So one of the things that I would recommend if you're using CreativeSpace storage is you store the proxies on the CreativeSpace storage, and the person who creates those, everyone can basically access their CreativeSpace system remotely over the internet if those are optimized for the performance. So basically then everyone can start working with those clips, and they don't need to relink because the only difference is that they don't have the real-time access to the source footage, which if they sync and then they relink afterwards, they can, or if they just do the drive mapping. But yeah, I mean, that basically now the new feature makes it easy, just like Premiere, that you can just hit a toggle and it's going to play the proxies instead of the source for anything that's in there.
Does it do that if it creates the proxies, or if you create the proxies outside of Premiere?
Either way,
Excuse
you
me,
either create them in there and it automatically attaches them, or you can just attach them externally.
And when you create them in DaVinci, do you pick the directory? So you create a directory that's the proxy directory?
Or yeah, you go into the preferences. You go into the preferences, and it says, yeah, define a path to go to. If you just link them, you don't have to use their directory.
Okay.
You can have them anywhere.
And if you create them outside, what is the naming convention? The same, uses the same file name, just a different extension because it's a different format, or do you do an underscore at the beginning? How does it differentiate what's the proxy?
Yeah,
and what's the original file?
You would want to either do that where it's the same exact name, or you would want it to be, you would want to create it with Resolve with the real name embedded so that it would know exactly what it links to.
Okay, I'll have to try that.
And that's one of the things too, where real names are really helpful is, let's say, for example, you're working with like A7S footage where, there's lots of cameras, more consumer cameras that have, a structure where it kind of all the files are numbered, and then that structure repeats whenever you reformat the card. So now if you've got a project, it's always been a problem, especially with Premiere, where you then go to send the timeline to color. Well, now you've got 15 different clips that are called 00001 dot, AVC or something, and XAVC, and it doesn't know which one is which. Whereas if you use the real names, you prep the media first in Resolve, you can put each of those in a separate bin, and you can name the real name after the bin name. So then when you get the timeline back, you'll always know it's this 0001 from this bin. That's the one I'm referencing. And it'll always link up and you don't run into problems.
Okay.
Great. So those were the questions that we got submitted by you guys beforehand, but now I wanted to open up the last couple minutes of our time together. It's just an open floor. Anyone, you can unmute yourself, ask any questions, any follow-ups on what Nick and Philip have talked about today. You can also we'd love to hear any testimonials, anything that has helped your workflow as you've transitioned into working remote, any of the struggles you've encountered, but just really an open floor discussion if anyone would like to join in.
Anybody? Bueller?
Everyone coming all at once.
Yeah.
I know.
Happy to talk about the work itself as well, whatever you guys would like.
Yeah.
Come on, don't be shy.
Okay, I'm going to break the ice then. Hi, this is Ye Gong. Actually, I see Glenn is online, and also John. So those are my friends, folks. Glenn and I went all the way back to like Preco and so on, and same as with John, during the Densitron time. So, but anyway, that's a short story. I was from Stanley Fox, Sam, from that part of the wall. And I left the company before the GV took over, and I'm on my own as a consultant company. But I have this plan. It's for news. It's a news programming rather than for actual creative media per se. For country in Southeast Asia. So I've been talking with John on the potential, scenario of setting up the not really entirely cloud-based, but pseudo type thing, but mainly for the news production. So for that aspect of it, Nick and Phillips, you have any pointers for me? This is something that it's a very critical and very it's a country, it's Myanmar. There's a country I was born. So there's an uprising and protests and so on. So the media agency is being basically shut down. So they're just running it around town, hiding at the same time doing news programming and so on. So it's a very difficult, very challenging when internet access and so on. So for that sort of thing, I'm actually out from outside the country, so I can help out a lot of things as far as the architecture of it, setup and so on. So I just wanted to hear your comments, what would be the best way to do proxy-based editing systems versus, offline, online type thing versus, cloud is probably is too much for them to have access into it. So that's where I'm at. So just, educate me, if something that's actually fall into this discussion group. It's appreciated.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is to look into Starlink. That would probably provide a more consistent internet connection out there. I mean, do you know anything about, what kind of cellular connections or internet connections are available typically?
Yes. Yeah. Currently, actually, it's not around the clock. They just the military literally stopped the internet. Only certain hours you have access to it, and the speed is, not even 4G, maybe 3G or 2.5G or something in between. So very spotty, and it literally cut down all these mobile internet access. So it's only for the fiber connection. So basically only for businesses that they want this internet running in the business hours. So after business hour, everything stops.
Yeah, I would definitely say then to look at satellite-based internet. So that's gonna be more reliable and kind of get around problems because it's just going around this planet, not under government control. And that would give you, I mean, that it's not as fast as, a connection here in the US, but you're going to get at least a consistent connection and you can work around your formats with that. And with such a crucial, scenario like you're talking about, getting some kind of content out is more important than getting the best quality content out in terms of, visual quality and bit rate and everything like that. So that would definitely be something that I would look into and figuring out some kind of rig where it's sending that live stream out over that connection, as it's being recorded so that someone can then capture that somewhere else and, start cutting that together or be working with it. And you don't have to rely on that person getting to, the actual place where they can then offload it to a computer and then upload it and all of that. So
the other thing
more towards that.
is any technologies that do a sync model that don't need a constant, like FTP, it's got to be constantly streaming. And if it stops, you might be able to pick it up once you get the internet connection back, but something Dropbox like, or there are a lot of other technologies like that where it is, taking the pieces and syncing it to the cloud that then can be downloaded later as internet comes up and down, that at least gives them time to get the material there in hours when you do have a network connection, without having to worry about having something cut in the middle, because those technologies are built to allow things to be cut and then pick up where they left off because they're keeping track of what bits have been moved.
Okay, that's great. As far as the for chroma key or in that nature for production and the setups, any pointers for that? How do we do that?
Yeah. You
go
ahead right now.
I was just gonna say the thing that whenever you do a chroma key, the thing that's most important is evenly light the backdrop, the keying screen, because you're, and you want to actually get the human being as far away from that backdrop as possible, so you're not casting a shadow and you're not getting bleed through or reflection of the green. That's the best way to get a good key.
Yeah, definitely. Another thing, both for the chroma key and for just creating the files that you could stream out over the internet with that satellite connection. I talked about this earlier, the ATEM Mini Pro. The ISO will actually live create proxies for, you can customize the bitrate for the proxies for all of the different inputs. And so they've got the 4 input unit and the 8 input unit. And the 4 input unit has one Ultimat keyer in it, and the 8-input one actually has, I believe, 4 of them. And basically what it's designed for actually is the first 4 are for your video inputs, and the other 4 are actually for what you're going to put behind, once you do the chroma key. So like these would be linked to something like an Unreal Engine output. So then or like a virtual set, setup. So basically then you, within this box, you can composite the 4 inputs to the 4 backgrounds and basically have it all built in. So basically with this unit, you could live get the feeds in, do the chroma key, and generate the proxies and stream those out, all at the same time. And basically control the bandwidth based on what you set the bitrate for those H.264 proxies. And it creates basically DaVinci Resolve project files of whatever the person was doing. So like, what if you have multiple cameras, someone could be switching live, and that would actually turn into a timeline that then they could edit afterwards. Plus you can get the audio plugged in to this box, so you don't have to worry about the audio sync later. You can just plug in the lavalier or whatever the output is of your sound mixer into it. And like I said, this does have the full Ultimat keyer in it, so you can do basically up to 4 of those keys right in here.
Yeah, I mean, those little ATEM Mini Pros are really powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
4 or 5 years ago, to get the equivalent of that would take a huge switcher and an encoder and be, tens of thousands of dollars. And now you can, on your desktop for less than $1,000 have all that capability. So it's a really powerful tool, especially in that kind of environment where you want to get as best of quality show as you can with limited resources.
Yeah, and the nice thing about specifically the way they designed this to make the H.264 files is that they designed it for basically like hot swapping. So basically, if you had a hard drive plugged in and you unplug that and you have a second drive plugged in, it will just switch over and keep recording. So what that means is that it basically puts all the information in the headers. So if the file gets stopped at any point, it's not corrupted like most formats are. If it gets stopped, everything that you got so far is playable. And it even actually supports growing clips. So basically, if you were able to connect to the storage on here and pull the files from that, you could actually open them in Resolve and start editing with them while they're still being captured.
Okay. So for actual feeds, the sources, can they be on NDI, or how is it pushing it into the production switches?
Yeah, so it supports HDMI, and so you could just get an SDI converter, or which Blackmagic makes, or you could get an NDI to HDMI converter, like I think MagSafe makes them, and BirdDog, a few other manufacturers make them.
Yeah, that's 7,000 miles away. So if I have a production switcher here, it'll be a bit of a challenge, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unfortunately, NDI is not so much designed for. It's designed for local networks. It's not so much for over the internet. There are systems that convert, in process, but yeah, NDI was kind of designed to be within a facility, not so much between facilities.
Yeah, so probably target for non-real time, not live news.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thanks for the question on that. Yeah, I think what Philip and Nick were both saying is to kind of produce the content as a file.
Yeah.
Some sort of satellite distribution system to get that file to a location that they can then play it out in country.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Nick. Yep.
Thanks for the question.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes left. If anyone else has a question or anything they would like to share, be happy to hear you out.
Anyone?
Any takers?
People, you can be shy.
I know,
camera.
that's okay. That's okay. We understand.
Actually,
All right.
I've got a quick
Yeah.
question for Philip.
Yeah.
Then. So Philip, in your real world examples with all of your various forms of storage that you were sort of elaborating on in the various scenarios you've been using it, how often are you recycling that storage? Are you having to throw it out? What's your process there?
Yeah, so for me, I've gone through several sets, and it's usually because the technology changes, but I'll go for a year or two where I was, I'd found these really nice cases that were USB um, 3 with the whatever the UTAP or the additional capability was that was giving you, 10 megabits per second on them, or megabytes per second. And I was using those with just regular SSDs in those. So I would, go on site, I'd do my work, I'd come back, I'd offload, and I would use those for several, expeditions. And then eventually the technology would change and I'd step up to something else that had greater density. So I'd swap out the SSDs for something with larger density. Now with NVMe and the U.2 form factors, I've then switched again. But over the last 2 years, I've been using their G technology makes them. They're little U.2 USB-C drives. They're about the size of a pack of gum. They're 2 terabytes. I wish they were 4 terabytes. Those are coming, but I'll use those. It'll be sort of the same thing that, I have those, and then I have a 4 terabyte SSD that those two terabytes get backed up to. So I have 2 copies of everything. Get home, offload, and as soon as the offload's done and it's been distributed across, the NASs I have at home, then I'll clear that media up and use it again. I only keep it on the storage I use in the field until it's been backed up onto the NAS, and then the NAS has been backed up at least once, so that at least I'm in two places. And then I'm trying to be somewhat consistent, but I'm a little lazy sometimes. But of taking, 14 terabyte hard drives, backing everything up to that, and then taking that copy up to my sister's to have at her house, who's about 12 miles away here in Atlanta. So everybody goes, "Well, aren't you afraid? What happens if something happens to Atlanta?" I said, if something happens to Atlanta to both our homes, my media is the last thing I'm going to be worried about at that point in time.
Yeah.
I'm more worried about a fire or a flood, destroying my media. So, and that 14 terabyte drive, and now 18, I'll recycle those. I'll usually have 2 of those, and one will go to the sisters, and then I'll back up everything again 6 months later, or however often, depending on how much work I'm doing, and then take the drive back from her and use that for the next time, as long as I can fit the stuff on there. And then eventually we'll get SSDs that have the same capacity, and it won't be an issue, and they'll be much smaller drives.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, it is 6 o'clock. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to email us. You can just reply to any of the emails that I sent out up to this meeting. Obviously, check out our website, creative.space, and you can email us off of there as well. And I wanted to just thank you guys, thank our hosts, Nick and Philip, for all of your awesome insight. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day.
Yes, great stuff.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.